Right, so hello. My name's Graham Hughes, and I'm going to be your tutor for this webinar today. And I'm going to talk about the mixed methods tools in MAXQDA today, probably taking about an hour to do this, so settle down, make yourselves comfortable. I'll take questions throughout, I think. So to ask a question, please find the chat button up here on the GoToMeeting toolbar, and send your question to everyone if you don't mind. I have a spare screen with the chat open, so that's where I will see it. And it might help other people who have a similar query to save two people asking the same question. Please leave your microphones muted and your cameras turned off. Someone's got a camera on. I can see, thank you. That'll cause less distraction for everybody else. So, quick item about me. I'm based in England. I've worked with MAXQDA for about 12 years now, and with all kinds of software for over 30 years. Now, a little bit of personal introduction might be helpful here. My main career was as an accountant, and I should really be retired now. But late in life, I went to my local university here in the UK, University of Surrey, and did a course on social research methods, expecting to become a statistician. And I was horrified during that excellent master's degree course to hear about the paradigm wars, the wars between quantitative and qualitative analysts and so on. It didn't make sense to me as a very mature student coming in, even though I had a quantitative bent from having been an accountant. I've always looked at it this way. I have two hands, my left and my right. And I think of my left hand as being my qualitative hand and my right hand as being my quantitative hand. And in my life, I've discovered I can do much more with two hands than I can by tying one hand behind my back. So insisting that things can only be done with quantitative or with qualitative, I think is just self-defeating. Mix them, put them two together, and you'll be able to do a great deal more with both. So that's where I come to mixed methods. Mixing them is natural to me. I followed that up in Surrey with 3 years as a social researcher in a quantitative website called the Question Bank, publishing the questionnaires of major surveys. Then I did 3 years of qualitative work in a project comparing 4 qualitative CACDAS programs, one of which was MAXQDA. And that's where I fell in love with this program, it being so much better than the 3 others I had to work with for those 3 years. Since 2012, I should have been retired, but I've been continuing to do training, webinars, workshops, and conferences, and that continues right to now. So now, let's get into mixed methods. Still got people arriving, but I've just sort of stalled for a bit to keep us going, but I now need to minimize the GoToMeeting, get that out of the way. Sorry, I can't respond to all the greetings, but let's think about mixed methods. We've got to do a little bit of kind of background theory so that you can understand where these tools come from. I want to say straight away, I'm going to go through all of the tools on the Mixed Methods Toolbar in MAXQDA, and I'll be using version 2022, the latest version of MAXQDA. But it seems to me that nobody would ever actually, in real life, use all of these tools in any one project. Some of them might almost be contradictory. So I'm going to do something that's rather unnatural, which is to go through all of them. And sometimes we'll struggle a little bit to find appropriate data. But that's the object, to take you through so that you can get a handle on what all of these tools are designed for. So the background of mixed methods. I identify 3 fundamental kinds of method mixing, which I've got here with a color base, and perhaps a diagram will make it a little bit more clear. Oh, I've lost some arrows on this diagram, never mind. On the left, I've got a qualitative project. We start by collecting some qualitative data, we analyze it, and we draw some results and conclusions. On the right, I've got a quantitative project. We collect quantitative data, analyze it, and come to some results and conclusions. Someone's struggling with audio, but I think Everybody else is probably getting the audio, or I would have heard from others. So, Kimberly, I think it must be at your end that the problem is. So we got these two quantitative and qualitative projects. Thank you, Matthew. Yep. Kimberly, I'm afraid it is your local problem. How do we mix them? The colored arrows show three possible ways in which they might be mixed. In blue, we'll start at the bottom. You might do the two projects entirely separately, draw completely separate results and conclusions as a result of your analysis, and then look at how they combine to give you meta-inferences. How can you get convergence or triangulation out of your two projects by looking at their conclusions, their results and conclusions? Doesn't really seem like mixing of methods to me. Then in green, we have the sequential. Oh, just going back to here, the blue, results-based integration. We have two tools in MAXQDA. We have hyperlinking and something called the side-by-side display, which I will show you shortly. Then in green, we have sequential mixing. This is where we do the qualitative project, maybe, first. When we come to the end of the qualitative project, someone's unmuted their microphone. Please, could you mute your microphone? Someone's got background noise. Thank you. At the end of your qualitative project, you do that classic conclusion, more research is needed, and you decide that the more research should be a quantitative study. You've perhaps identified some curious phenomenon in your qualitative work, and you want to find out, is that phenomenon common? In which case you need to create a quantitative study of some kind and collect a much larger sample, but focus on the phenomenon that you're interested in. So we do the sequence. We do the qualitative one, we go up the green arrow, and then we do a quantitative project, and we come to our final conclusions. And there can be, that's what will be called an exploratory sequential analysis. But we might do it the other way around. We might start with a quantitative study, identify as a result of the statistics some correlation between two factors, and we wonder, why might that be? What is the mechanism by which that correlation actually takes place in the real world? For that, we would need a qualitative study to get down into much deeper into the details of people's lives to find out what is the possible mechanism bringing about that correlation. That is an explanatory sequential analysis. I haven't put a green arrow from there going up and across because it would make the diagram a bit too complicated. But those are the green tools, and in my analysis up here, I've got that the sequence-oriented strategies. Now, there are not any specific tools in MAXQDA particularly for that, although there are two that I will describe because they are said to be ideal for that. The real mixing comes with the red arrow here, where we merge the analysis of both kinds of data sort of at the same time. Certainly before we draw our results and conclusions, we do analysis which combines both qualitative and quantitative data here. And these are the red functions, or the red ideas that I've got here. And there are several tools, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on that, because that is the most exciting area of mixing of methods. And it's the area where you most need specialist tools like those in MAXQDA. So that's the background. Can I just mention, there is an excellent book called Analyzing Qualitative Data with MAXQDA. The authors are Udo Kuckartz and Stefan Rediker, and they devote a whole chapter 13 of that book, to precisely this, mixing methods using MAXQDA. I'll come back to that at the end of this workshop and give you that reference again. But now let me jump into MAXQDA. So now here is MAXQDA version 2022, and I've got that slide. I've just imported a document with those slides, so I can go up and down looking at the diagram. Oh, that one's got all the arrows, jolly good. So we can work with these. I'm mainly going to use the English language example, which is called work-life balance. It's just about got enough data that we can demonstrate these things in it. and so that's what I will mainly use. So I hope you're all pretty much familiar with the MAXQDA interface. This is an advanced webinar after all. If you're a Mac user, you should see very similar things when you open up the same example. So everything I show you works on both Windows and Mac, but I am actually using Windows at the moment. Now, the first thing I want to do is look at the blue lines, the results-based integration that we come to first of all. So hyperlinking and side-by-side display. For this, I need different data. So I'm going to open a different project which I've got created specifically for demonstrating this side-by-side display. I've got a very simple project here. It just has two documents. The topic of the research is urban gardening. People creating little plots and growing food and vegetables and so on in the midst of towns and cities. And we have a qualitative study, which is currently open here in my document browser. So we have lots of qualitative information here. And then we have a quantitative study, which I'll open here now and jump perhaps down near the bottom of that. And at the bottom of that, you can see we've got lots of tables, SPSS outputs, and so on. So that's clearly the quantitative study. So how do we do this meta inferences? I'm just going to come back to here, drawing together the results and conclusions from these two studies. The reports that I've imported into the project are themselves the results and conclusions at the end of two research studies. So what I want to do is look at them and see, do we have convergence? Do we have triangulation of any kind? So what I've done, or what has been done between us, is we've coded these two documents. So let me just activate them and activate a code called Reasons for Practicing. And that's got various data segments from each of the documents looking at why people do urban gardening. And for this, I now go to the Mixed Methods tool, and I'm going to start right in the middle at the side-by-side display. I'm sure this is something that everybody thinks they understand, but the problem is you rarely have the right data to actually use it. So hopefully this data will demonstrate it for you quite nicely. So we'll open the side-by-side, and I'm going to work with coded segments for this particularly. So it's actually already set up, but let's just show you how to set it up. It asks you for the qualitative, drag and drop the document here. So we'll find the qualitative document and drop that in. And for the quantitative, drag that one, drop the quantitative one in there. And over here, we can bring in any codes, but I will bring in the reasons for practicing code there. So that's just a simple setup. We could have 10, 15, 20 codes, as many as you like down here. But it's got to have just the two documents. This side-by-side display only has two columns, one for the qualitative, one for the quantitative. If you think you've got more documents than that, you haven't reached your final results and conclusions. You're jumping into it too early. But you should have a single set of conclusions from your qualitative study and a single set of conclusions from your quantitative study. If you've got more documents than that, you're doing a literature review rather than looking at integrating or mixing your qualitative and quantitative methods. Let's click the OK. And now we get the display, the side-by-side display. We have a column with the qualitative findings and a column with the quantitative findings. We could have several codes down here. We've only got the one, but if you have multiple, you click on any code and its data will be displayed. But now here in this column, I can read qualitative conclusions. Some farms and gardens have programs that are geared specifically towards learning. And over here in the quantitative findings, we've got a chart, respondents, reasons for gardening. And I'm not seeing learning or education there. So we're not getting convergence here. In the qualitative data, they're thinking about learning and education. The quantitative study did not identify that. In the qualitative study, they've got something about food safety. Oh, and we have got a food safety column here in the frequency chart of some kind of result in the quantitative. So there is convergence. There we are seeing possibly the same phenomenon that people have talked about food safety in the quantitative study, and they've also described it in some way in the qualitative study, and so on. And we have food security, and I don't think, well, possibly save money might be something to do with food security. Promotion of public green space, that's probably improved the environment. So there's not complete convergence in these two, but you can see how this tool, because that's what we're interested in, the side-by-side display, how this would work to help you look at your results and conclusions which have been independently generated from two quite separate studies. Remember, the qualitative study produced its results and conclusions. That's the left-hand document. The quantitative study quite separately did its results and conclusions. In fact, if I go back to this and close this down and we go back to the top of the documents, we'll find the authors are completely different people because these have just been taken from the literature. So there's no reason why they should necessarily come to the same conclusions, but that's why we might look at the side-by-side display. So that is one use, well, that is the use of that particular tool. I also mentioned hyperlinking. Just come back to here. We've got the hyperlinking. That is a simple tool in MAXQDA where in one document we mark a segment as being of interest. Let me just go and get the overview of links open, because we have got a couple of links. Here we are. Let's find one of these. Close that down. So here in this document, we are in the quantitative results, and we've got a piece of text here about food flavor. And when a hyperlink has been set up, so when I double click on it, it jumps to the other end of the link in the qualitative results, where we're thinking there's some connection between food safety and that. Not a very good link, not very convincing, but you get the idea. With hyperlinking, when you hover over one end of the link, in the little tooltip that pops up, you can read the text on the other end of the link, or with a double click, you can jump backwards and forwards between the two as often as you like. So that's another way. If you don't get the hang of the side-by-side display, you can do that results-based comparisons. Let me go back and open up my main project, and I'm getting a question from Janice. If you need to analyze one's own research, well, yes, it doesn't matter who the authors are necessarily. Yes, if you've done two projects, one pure quantitative and the other pure qualitative, Janice, and you want to bring them together, yes, I think it would be a good idea to create a new MAXQDA project, import those two documents like that, create a new coding scheme for the identified areas of overlap, of possible convergence between the two, and code them, and then you can pull them up on the side-by-side display in the way I've just demonstrated. So that's results-based integration, which is the blue lines at the bottom. Now, the next one, well, we're going to jump in, I think. Let's just come down. We'll start on the red mixing. And now we have to tackle this tricky word, variables. Now, this sometimes causes consternation amongst pure qualitative researchers because they don't like the use of the word variables. It sounds far too quantitative for their taste. But I've sat in many presentations of pure qualitative research where people have drawn comparisons between the genders. Do men talk this way and women talk that way, or different age groups, younger people and older people, and contrasting those groups? Well, that's all we're talking about here, really. Variables is just the tool in MAXQDA whereby we can categorize our documents and cases with multiple aspects of their lives or their circumstances in some way. So let's just quickly look at the variables menu. And in this, we've got document variables in this block in blue. We've got code variables in this brown, and speaker variables, which is a special version of document variables for those in focus groups. So if you've got a focus group transcript in your data, you will see this. But if you haven't got focus groups, you won't even see these offered. I'm just going to use the document variables. In this data, I've got a set of interview documents. They are cases in a little kind of study, so we can have information about them. Let me open the list of document variables and just point out how this works. The red buttons correspond to all the system variables created for every project whenever it started. So let's scroll a bit further down, because lower down we find blue buttons, and these are user-defined variables. So for these documents, we might have their civil status. Are they married or separated or single? How many children do they have, and so on. All sorts of information about characters, people in this study that we can use. We create the variables over here with a new variable on this, and we populate it with the data editor. I can either go through that button, or I've got those same two buttons here. So let's just quickly open up the data editor. And at the top, I've got the interview documents. If I just activate the interviews over here and use the interview filter, I can limit this display, so I'm only looking at the interviews, which simplifies it a little bit. There's a survey in this example which clogs up this display a little bit. So we've got their highest level of academic achievement there. We've got their civil status, are they married, and so on. Lots of variables that aren't populated for these people, their employment, their age, and so on. So a number of variables that we can use to categorize the data, and we're going to use some of those in the next step. So come back to mixed methods. The first tool I'm going to use is the activate documents by variables. I need to deactivate everything here so that it will show up. So let's start this. Activate documents by variables. So we're going to use the fact that we want to activate certain documents, but only according to their values on selected variable things. So let's just use that civil status, which I saw a moment ago was certainly used. So the way this dialog works is we build a conditional formula in the middle, and when we're ready, we hit the activate button. So I can choose variables by selecting them here and clicking on the little arrow to move them across. I've now got half a formula. Civil status is we need a value, and I can pick up the values over here where this will self-populate with whatever values are available possibly. Let's pick up the in partnership or married, it now tells me down here that it's found 28 documents. Now, there are only 10 interviews here, so the survey is getting in the way because we've got the same variable being used for the survey. So I've got to be a little bit clever here, and I've got to do something extra to limit this to the interview documents. And MAXQDA can handle this perfectly well. If I take the document group variable as well and bring this in and change the relationship here from or to and, I can build a formula where civil status in partnership and document group equals, and we want the interview. Where's the interviews? There we are, interviews. So now it finds just 10 documents match the second one, and 5 match the combined in partnership and being an interview candidate. So let's activate that. And we now have 5 interview documents. Matteo, Selim, David, Kazumi, and Anna have all been activated. I could now activate something like childcare. How have these, they're all married, so they might have children. Let's move the boundary up a bit. And I can read the 7 segments where the married people talk about childcare problems in their work-life balance. And at any stage, I can come back to this and I can change the value. If I highlight the civil status, I can change the value. I don't have to rebuild all the time. Let's look at the single people now. Single and in interviews, activate. It's found 3 people who match that, Riley, Chris, and Amadi, but surprise, surprise, they haven't talked about childcare. Hardly the greatest social research discovery, but hopefully it demonstrates the point. So that is the activate by document variables, and it is just the first step. It's a little dinky walking step into the field of mixed methods. We could use any of the variables. Let's reset this. We can reset the whole list here, clear the list. Okay. We've got various other ones. We could look at Let's try the number of children variable. Has that got values? Yes. Number of children 3, and we'll need to have that document group again. And move that in and limit that to interviews. It finds one document, activate that one, and there we are. We've got somebody who has got children. He's got 3 children, we can see from the favorite variables, and so it's not surprising that Selim talks quite a lot about childcare and so on. So there we are. You can use multiple variables in this tool. Now, I'm going to clear that list, and we'll cancel that. Now, let's build up. Let's be more ambitious and turn to the interactive quote matrix, which is the next tool up here. I've done activate by document variables. Now we'll look at the interactive quote matrix. It starts off the same way. Actually, I just want to clear that list. I'm going to activate all the interview documents because for this one, we don't need the document group activation. I've got a button down here for only activated documents, so that's fine. I've got to select some codes for this to work. So let's look for some possible codes. I've got the childcare one. Let's have the amount of hours, the free time for self-care, and let's have the typical workday one as well. So I've got 4 codes in play. So we'll use those codes. Now for this, the interactive quote matrix, I can bring all the possible values of a variable into play. A little tick in this box, and now when I move civil status into the formula box, we'll get a different result. In one click, it's brought in all the possible values of the civil status variable. Remember when I did the activate by document variables, it was 1 at a time. Now for this, we can have all the possible values that come in here, and that's great. Only for activated documents and codes. Let's click the OK, and what do we get? We get a great big table. Let's make it as wide as I can, and let's just set this to have all 5 columns showing. So we've got those who are married. We've got those who didn't answer, no documents. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to squeeze that down narrow because it's not giving us very much. We've got those who are separated or divorced. Those who are widowed, no documents. So let's make that a bit wider. We've got 5 columns, but actually only 3 are populated because in this limited project, not every one was there, but they could have been. And I've got the 4 variables, 4 codes, sorry, that I chose with activation. And now by clicking on something like childcare, I can read what those who are married said about childcare. Remember, that was one I looked at with the activate by variable. And the separated divorced people, I didn't go into those, but they talk about childcare as well. That's not entirely surprising, is it? Free time. Even those who are divorced and single talk about free time and restrictions on their free time and so on. So the marvelous thing about this display is that the columns are independently scrollable. So I can move up and down, and I can juxtapose a contribution from David, Tan, and Chris across here, aware that David is married, Tan is separated or divorced, and Chris is single. And I can think how they've talked about any one of these topics by scrolling these around and making appropriate comparisons. I think this tool is just amazing. And I think every qualitative researcher, you don't have to worry about mixed methods, ought to be able to use this because it can add so much power to your analysis, to the way you think about your data. Even this one is a little scroll, but so that is the interactive quote matrix. Let's just look at how it was set up again. Let me start again now that you've seen it. So I've got these ones. Now, a little tip for you is you can move the columns around. The rows in this table will become the columns, and you can change the order. So actually, if I move the separated divorced up and the widowed up and the single up, maybe, and the no answer to the end, I've got a kind of scale of relationship down to no answer. Let's run it again on the same data, and the columns now come in that order: married, separated, widowed, single. I've got to change the number to 5 there each time to get the last one, but as the last one is empty, actually change that back to 4, and I've got a bit more space. I don't need that 5th column, and I can squeeze this one down by dragging them either way and arrange my screen like that comfortably, and then I can get to work looking at the data and analyzing it. I think that tool is fantastic. Staying very firmly in the qualitative paradigm, I'm looking only at texts as the answers there, but I am using the value of a variable to sort the columns, to group the documents together into groups in columns. Now let's look at the crosstab, which is very much related to what we've just been looking at. So let's open up the crosstab. The dialog looks very much the same. And lo and behold, if we have the tick in insert all variable values and move the civil status variable into the thing, we get the same effect. Let's straight away move these up to get them in the order that I had last time, that kind of hierarchy. So the setup is identical for the interactive quote matrix. Click the OK, and we get a frequency table. What does this mean? These are the counts, the numbers I get here are the number of coded segments in each cell for that code, typical workday, amongst the people who are in partnership or married. At the bottom, this N row is telling me how many documents are in each column. So there are 5 people in partnership, and between the 5 of them, they've contributed 8 coded segments for the typical workday, 7 coded segments on childcare. At the other end, we've got 3 people who are single. They've contributed 5 comments on the workday, but none on childcare. That was a thing we observed before, but now we're just looking at the numbers, the frequencies. Behind each of these numbers is a group of text segments, but sometimes the numbers work to show us things. Now we can use the similar tools to those in the code matrix browser. We can have row percentages if we like with that button, and we can shade it so that the highest percentage in the row has the darkest shade, and it's hardly surprising that the largest group with 5 gets the largest shadings on the row partnership. So let's turn that shading off, and let's go for column percentages and reshade, and now it's a little bit different because the single people actually are coming up with a, for them, reading down this column, they've talked just as much about the typical workday as the free time. There isn't really enough data to be drawing these conclusions very much, but it's interesting possibly that the divorced and separated people have talked more about childcare than any of these other 3 topics that I'd selected. The data isn't really large and rich enough for this particular tool to make a great deal of sense, but hopefully you get the idea. Let's turn the shading off and go back to just the plain numbers. So we had the interactive quote matrix. Now, a wonderful thing about this is that I can actually, by clicking on this button, I can turn this frequency table into the same interactive quote matrix. Remember that 8 and that 3. Look at that 3 on the typical workday for the separated divorced. Open up the interactive quote matrix and click on the typical workday. Separated divorced, 3 coded segments. There we are, 1 from Tan, 2 from Tan. Long one, the last one, must almost certainly, oh no, from Tatiana. 2 different people, it's 2 documents, but 3 coded segments. So I can go from my, and I've still got my crosstab, that's still there. So those 3, I can jump with these both screens up. I can see a number here, and I can go and see the segments. Amount of hours 4 for the singles, let's come down here. Amount of hours, and look at the singles column over here. 4 coded segments from 3 documents. I can read them. So with both of these tables up on your screen, you can think quantitatively and then check your conclusions qualitatively. Just think back to this diagram. We're doing a great deal of working backwards and forwards along this red arrow, aren't we, by doing that? We're doing quantitative and qualitative. Now, Guida has asked, where again are the variables defined? Okay, you're beginning to see the value. So yeah, let's just go back and fair question. I'll close those two down. I'm pretty much completed my work on this. Let's just reset my activations there. In the variables part, or the variables menu, and I'm using document variables, which are these first 5 functions at the left-hand end of this toolbar, Guida. And I can define my variables with the list of document variables. This is how I create a new variable. I give it a title, a name, or a label. What is it about? And with the data editor, I can populate it by putting in the values for each document. What is the value for that variable? So this is where we define the variables. Ultimately, the data obviously has to come from your data collection. Cases might be people, but they could be organizations quite often. They might be as much as countries in some situations. It entirely depends on the research question that you're trying to answer. And so obviously you need to have variables that are meaningful in the context of your research question and the kind of data that you're collecting. But that is the answer to your question. That is where the variables are defined. I think I'm going to leave Daryl's question because I think he's giving MAXQDA a compliment. So let's move on. So that was developing uses of variables, some easy tools. Let's move on to the next set. Now, here I've identified these in green, and these are these 2 tools up here, up on the toolbar. For the mixed methods. I've identified them in green because they are kind of sequential ones. They're very similar to the tools we've just been looking at, but if you look in the help manual for each of these tools, the reference manual, it talks about sequential designs. That's the context in which these tools were designed. Possibly people doing sequential analysis might find the interactive quote matrix and crosstab a bit too scary, so this is a way that they can do it. But the result of this qual themes by quant groups is very much like the interactive quote matrix, as you'll see in a moment. We just get there by a slightly different route. I just need to check from my notes what data I was going to use for this. So I want the interviews, and I don't think I need to activate anything. So let's open up the qual themes by quant groups. And this is the dialog. This is a different dialog from the ones that we've seen. And it's asking me, first of all, for the groups which will be the columns, to choose a document variable. I'll be quite boring, but it means that you can follow me more easily, I think, if I keep using the same variable. So I'll use the civil status. So I select the variable that I want. I'm working with these interview documents, but I now have to choose the values each time. So here are the possible values. So we will start this time with the married. And for this one, we'll have the separated and divorced. It counts how many documents it finds. And for this, we'll have the singles. And finally, we'll have the widowed. But in fact, there are none. So 5, 2, and 3 is 10, and I've got 10 documents in there. So we're going to pick everybody up with this. And now I can drag my codes in here. Let's bring in the typical workday. We don't need activations. We can just drag them in positively. We can drag in the childcare. We can drag in the free time. Let's have something different. Let's drag in the domestic work one. And possibly, let's think about a satisfaction one. Are they, I'm looking at ones which got a reasonable amount. Satisfied with workplace. Let's drag that one in as well. Only for activated documents. Good. So that's the setup. I've chosen the columns up there quite manually. I've chosen the rows for the table by dragging in codes from my code system. Let's click OK. And you should not be surprised to find the screen looks familiar. Because, again, it's very much like the interactive quote matrix, and it works the same way. We've got the same thing. If we've got too many columns, well, it's limited to 4 columns. Actually, 4 is the maximum. You can't have any more than 4 in this tool. We can pick any code that we like and read the contributions. We've got 6 coded segments. a little bug. The numbers aren't quite right because it's picking up the survey, but we are actually getting the right data. Satisfied with workplace, and I'm getting the segments from my interviews here. So it's working very much the same way as the interactive quote matrix, but this might be slightly more welcoming to someone who's doing a sequential design. They've done a quantitative study, so they've got ideas, and they've followed up some of the people from the quantitative study to do a more in-depth analysis, and they can group those people by along the dimension of some variable that they've used in their quantitative study. So that is the qual themes by quant groups. Let's close it. Just look again at the setup dialog. We choose a variable here from any of the variables available. We've got a long list in this example one. It could be the number of children, and then we've got to choose new values and so on. That's not very exciting. And if you want to clear it, just click the please choose a document variable. And if you want to remove ones here, you can use these X's to get rid of codes that you don't want. And we'll cancel that. So that's the qual themes by quant groups for coded segments. Now, qual themes by quant groups for summaries works very much the same way, but it just uses different data. And for this, you need to be aware that there is the possibility in MAXQDA under the analysis menu of summarizing your data. Now, this sometimes puzzles people, what's going on with summaries. Well, if I just open up the summary grid, this is the first step in summarizing your data. You have to code your data fully, or you at least get some coding done, and then you can open up this summary grid. You can, by activation, you can limit the rows and columns and so on. But if we identify a cell here, anywhere where there's a blue button, there is some data. If I click on this blue box here, satisfied with time spent on education, I'm in the column for the document Matteo, and the code satisfied with time spent, and this is what Matteo has said. And in here, I've got a free text field where I can summarize in my own words. I can do data reduction to reduce what Matteo has said to something much smaller there. And if I were to do that, I would get a green shading box. Let me look at, say, Riley in the typical workday. Riley has 3 coded segments against typical workday and quite a lot of data if I scroll up and down there. Now, all of that data that I'm moving in the middle column has already been summarized by somebody in this column. So this is a data reduction. All of this from here, all of that highlighted blue data has been reduced to that by the act of summarizing. It is an analysis activity of data reduction. You might think of it as pre-seeing if your English is particularly good, but we are reducing data to a shorter form. That is called a summary. And anywhere in this grid where there is a green box, it tells me that a summary has been created. Where we have summaries, we can use them in the Mixed Methods tool, Qualitative Themes by Quantitative Groups Summaries. There is no way of using summaries in the interactive quote matrix or the crosstab. It wouldn't make sense with the crosstab because we've changed the numbers, but we can do it by this tool. So if you want to investigate the connection between your variables and summarized coded data, this is the tool for you. It works exactly the same way as we've just seen in the coded segments one. So we can choose a variable and we'll go for the civil status. Boring, I know, but it just means that we can do some of these things without thinking too much. Only for activated documents, yes, that brings the number down. We'll have the singles, and I think we had divorce. That's it. And then we can drag some codes in here again. So let's have now, can I remember which ones had summaries? Yeah, we certainly had typical workday. That had summary. Let's have childcare. Hopefully those, let's click the OK and see. Yes, the data you are seeing here are not coded segments. It's not the source data. All of this data are summaries. There is one cell for each person. Again, the number of documents is incorrectly including the survey documents, but I have only got interview documents in the list. And there is just one paragraph for each person, because however many coded segments they gave, I think we looked at Riley, didn't we? Had three coded segments under a typical workday, and there is that single summary. So now I can do the same exercise. I can think about how their civil status interacts with what I have summarized their comments, their contributions on each of these possible topics. I haven't got so much data on the childcare, but the typical workday is quite well populated, and so on. And as always, the columns are independently scrollable. So that's what the qual themes by quant groups is for. And again, it's recommended that that could be for those coming from a sequential design where they've done the quantitative study first, and this is the explanatory stage with the qualitative study, and they are using a variable that they originally identified from their quantitative study as a grouping value to group together cases into these columns. No, it doesn't work if anybody can be in more than one column. So the variables have got to be a single value for each person for these to make any kind of sense. Let me close that. And that was the qual themes by quant groups, coded segments, and summaries. Let me just look to the questions because we've had a couple. Daryl, can variable types be edited to override how they come in when loading? Erroneous. Oh, that's a bit of a technical question, Daryl, a bit beyond the scope of this particular webinar, so we'll leave that to the end. And Matthew's trying to help you anyway. Toy, yes, this presentation is being recorded and it should be available quite soon, but I can't absolutely confirm when. Let's continue. So now we're back to red. So we're into the mixing at the middle stage, the analysis. I did warn you that's where you'd spend most of the time. And now these are more challenging tools to use from the Mixed Methods Toolbar. And they're not all necessarily on that toolbar. The first one isn't actually a function on the toolbar. Converting code frequencies to a document variable. Sometimes you want to use the functionality of variables, but your data is still in the form of coded segments. And that's where this tool comes into play. For this, I'm going to come down. I've got a group of codes here under the general heading dissatisfaction. These interviewees were asked, let's just quickly have a look at some of the data. So dissatisfied with time spent working. Here are coded segments. I've got 7 coded segments from 5 documents where people have talked about I always think that life is not only work. Let's just, but you know, this is qualitative data behind there, and it's not always just work, work, work. This has been interpreted by the analyst as dissatisfied with the amount of time spent working, and so on. And Selim has other things, and so on, Tatiana, and so on. People have said things that have been interpreted as dissatisfaction with the amount of time spent working. Let's deactivate that and look at time for friends and families. We've got rather more here. And now we've got a little bit too much data. 17 coded segments might be a little bit too much. But dissatisfied with time for friends and family. Now, if you, for any code, it's always been here. If you right click on a code in your code system and pull up the context menu, here is the context menu for any code. And right down near the bottom in quite small print, we have this function, transform into document variable. Very simple little 4-word phrase with immense meaning behind it. When I click it, and I'm going to do so now, we've jumped into the data editor for document variables. Let's just limit it so we've only got the interview documents and come back to the right-hand end. A new variable has been added at the very end of the list called dissatisfied with time for friends and family. And it's been populated with numbers. Those numbers, you can check for yourselves later, but you'll take my word for it now, are the code frequencies with which this code, dissatisfied with time for friends and family, has been used in each of these documents. Let's just shrink this down a bit and look in the retrieve segments window. Matteo, I think, is the first document. The value we got there is 2. No, sorry, Matteo is the top document. What have I got? Oh, it is 2. Yeah, there are the 2 segments. There's Matteo, position 17, position 19. And then we're on to Riley. Riley has 2. So these are the actual segments. But up here, we've got the frequencies. Who's 5th in the list? Sorry, who's 3rd in the list? Selim. And yes, here are all Selim's 5 segments coming down here. So there is the source data. There is the code. But now we've got that data as a variable. We can think of it, it's a value. The number of times we've coded for each document under this, for this code. And we can treat this now like a numeric variable. It's just numbers, and we can group documents and things in various ways according to that. So now, if I were to say, let's do qual themes by quant groups, and choose a document variable and scroll to the very bottom of the list. No, it's in alphabetical order, is it? Somewhere I've got my, here we are, dissatisfied with time for friends and family. That's been added. I can choose a value. Let's start with 5. I can choose a value 2. 4 documents match that. 1, another 4, and none. And now I can look at my typical work day or anything else, say childcare, drag that in and so on, and click OK. And I'm back in the same thing, but now the columns are grouped by a new variable, how dissatisfied people are. If we take the frequency with which we've coded the dissatisfaction as a proxy for a kind of scale of how dissatisfied they are, we're going from maximum dissatisfaction at the left-hand end to minimum dissatisfaction further to the right. And we can look at how they've talked about their workday in terms of the level of satisfaction as measured by a code. Do you think that's exciting? I think it's immensely significant. So we started with the code, how dissatisfied are you with time that they were? Sorry, this is just an ordinary qualitative code just from text. Remember, look at the text that we got. It's not a direct question necessarily. It's just an ordinary code. But it's been used 17 times in all, and I've turned that into a variable. That's converting code frequencies to a document variable, which then allows me to relate to other codes in ways that aren't easy in code relations browsers and code matrix browsers and so on. Now, quantitizing. There is a really scary word, isn't it? Quantitizing. We started on a qualitative project, and we're going to quantize it. We're going to move very much over to the right-hand paradigm, over to the quantitative paradigm, and so on. But all it is just a multiple version of the one we've just looked at, which was rather exciting. The quantitizing tool, it has its button up here. The button is grayed out when you've got no codes activated. Let's use this dissatisfaction one. Let's activate the entire group of dissatisfaction codes here. So that's 8 codes now activated. And I can convert all of those into document variables in one step. That's what this quantitizing tool does. I could use any of them afterwards like variables. So having activated a whole group of codes, I click on the quantitizing buttons, and I just get an "Are you sure?" dialog. All activated codes will be transformed into document variables. And a reminder, the codes will remain in the code system, just in case you were worried. Converting things to variables doesn't stop them remaining as codes. Oh, that's a relief. Click OK. We might get the, yes, up comes the data editor. Let's limit it to the activated documents. Now, at the right-hand end of the table, I've got a whole bunch. And if I make any one of these, oh, it's not dissatisfaction with flexibility. Oh, that was the header code dissatisfaction. I might need to make them wider if I want to see what they mean. Flexibility, time spent working, workplace, and so on. They're all code frequencies, but an interesting thing, it did not recalculate the time for friends and family, which I had done before. That with its 225 pattern doesn't come again anywhere. So if you've already converted one of those codes, as I did, and then you convert the whole group, it doesn't throw MAXQDA. It doesn't duplicate the variable. It can tell it's already got that variable. So now any of those could be used in the way I just demonstrated in the qual themes by quant groups coded segments. So that was quantitizing. It wasn't scary at all, was it? Once we approach it in this way, deactivate those. Now things get more tricky and difficult, because now the next two, statistics by qual groups and typology table, these are different. These are very different, because now we're going to start using variables not as columns in our tables, but as rows in the tables. So they become kind of the dependent variable in the table. And we're going a little bit more quantitative again. I think I'll start with the typology table, because that makes it easier to understand the statistics by qual groups. So here is the typology table button on the window, and I think I need to activate is for this the data in the survey. In this example, remember, this is the work-life balance example, so all this data is available to you. I'm going to activate the survey group, and I don't want the survey questions themselves. So there we are. We've got 55 documents, 55 survey respondents have come up here. And let's just activate one. Here we are. Here's sort of typical survey data, just short answers and coded in multiple ways and so on. But the answers vary. But there is genuine qualitative text behind, and it's been coded in a variety of ways. But I'm not interested in the coding for this. I'm interested in the variables for this. So let's go into the typology table. First of all, actually, I'll just go back to my agenda document so we can see that. We're doing the typology table. Open up the typology table. Now, first of all, it asks us to determine the row variables. And I've got to think carefully. I need variables in the survey which are fairly numeric. And it quite helpfully, it will show them for me with a slight red color, the variables that will work best in this. So I've got a whole bunch of satisfaction variables in the survey. They were asked, how satisfied are you with your flexibility, your motivation at work, and so on. So I've got 5 variables here, which are kind of scaled variables in the survey data. So they're already ticked, but I can deselect and retick them if you want, but let's continue. Now I've got to choose the columns, and this dialog is now familiar because we've done this already. Let's go for the highest highest level of education. Where was that? It's a long list here. Highest level of education. Let's move that one in, and we'll have all values as conditions. Move that in. There we go. And again, let's make these come in a sensible order, descending from the highest: PhD, master, bachelor. Secondary school comes then, probably trade school, primary school, and no formal school. So a kind of descending scale of educational achievement for the columns. Useful to organize that before you go into the next step. Only for the activated documents. These are the survey documents. And here is a table called a typology table. And remember, the first one was the PhD, and then we come down the educational values. I've got the various other variables from the survey data, which are quantitative variables. These are all expressed as numbers. I'll go back in a moment and show you the source numbers. And let's just look possibly at this row, motivation at work, maybe. I won't bother with color shading. Got mean and standard deviation, and we've got the number of documents. There are four people in the survey have PhDs, and their mean motivation at work is 4.3. 11 have master's degrees, and their mean motivation at work is 4. Then we come down a little bit to first degrees, Bachelor of Art degrees, 13 people there, 3.7. We're getting a nice little pattern here. The less educated, the less motivation at work. The secondary school and trade school, I think we've got, and the primary school are all hovering around the 2.8 and 3, and this one isn't very meaningful because there's only one person who's only been educated to primary level but has completed this survey. So we should probably discount that data, and 2 people who didn't answer at all. But there's quite a nice little pattern, even in this example data, that the motivation at work appears on this basis to in some way correlate with the highest level of education. That's quite an interesting little result. The others aren't giving me anything very much. General happiness doesn't seem to make much difference what your education is. 3.5, 3.7, 3.8, 3.3, 3.6. Very interesting how similar all of those are, actually. So education doesn't make you happy, even though it motivates you at work, is a possible conclusion from that, but perhaps I'm stretching things a bit farther. But that's what a typology table can do for you. If you've got a big enough sample in your study, and you've collected your data in the right sort of way and so on, and analyzed it the right sort of way, those are the kind of things that you can do with the typology table. But what we are comparing in the typology table is variable against variable. That's the key thing here. These are variable values, the highest level of education, and these are variable values, what is your motivation at work? And so on. I'll take that question in a moment, but that's, do you get that idea? So up until I put this up on screen, everything we'd done was columns of variables, but the rows were always coded data, coded segments, or summaries, coded segments. But this time we've got variables in the rows as well. And the statistics by qual groups does the same, except the columns can be simply coded based on codes. I'm going to deactivate the survey because it doesn't work so well, and I come back to the interviews, and we'll activate the interviews for this last one. I did warn you we'd be struggling sometimes for data, and for this, in the interviews, luckily, we asked a question about your self-assessment of well-being with a scale from 1 to 5, where low is low well-being and high is 5 is high well-being. So I want to use that now as a grouping code. It's in the code system, but I'm going to use that for statistics by qual groups, which is this function here. So now it asks us to drag and drop a code that has subcodes here. So I'm going to bring in the well-being code. This needs to be a code group where each case, each document is only present once in one or other of the codes. It could be a question you've asked where or you've analyzed in the way, like in a survey, the kind of question which is, what is such and such and such? Tick one answer only. So here, we want to code for an idea, code one subcode only per document, so that in essence the number of segments in here, let's just minimize the group, we've got 10 coded segments, we've got 10 documents in play, so that's right, it's one each to get that. So I bring that code in here, and now I can choose its values. So we'll start from high and work our way down, 5, 4, 3, and 2, and we've got the 1, 5, 6, 9, 10. We've got the 10 documents. Luckily, nobody put a value of 1. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and then we can choose variables from the interview one. So this has got to be variables that have been used with the interviewees, and they need to be quantitative variables. They need to be numeric. The number of children might work on this. We really are struggling. And I think we've got an age variable. Hopefully that one will work. Just in case, is there another age? No. I think those are the only two which are measured as quantitative variables. Categorical variables won't work on this. They need to be numbers, but click OK. So number of children and age, and let's run the analysis, and here we are. It doesn't mean a great deal, unfortunately, but it is a kind of result. So on their level of well-being, we got one person that was very high, and their age is 42. 5 people were next lowest, well-being at 4, and their mean age is 28.8. The mean age of the 3 people who scored their well-being in the middle at 3 is 31, and the one person who gave the lowest value is 46. I can't draw any conclusions. Age is no indicator of well-being, or well-being doesn't determine age in any way. That's hardly a surprise either. So the fact that there is no pattern across there should be rather reassuring. I don't have the right data really to demonstrate that, but hopefully you can get the idea that we are looking at the values of quantitative variables grouped purely by qualitative codes. And that is a pretty extreme form of mixing our analysis across this red bar in the middle. Hopefully you're still game. I've had a few questions. Chiara, what are big enough samples in mixed methods studies? Yes, that is a question that somebody could do a dissertation on, couldn't they? How big is big enough? It really does depend on what your research question and so on. But you need, it used to be said when I started doing this work, you couldn't do quantitative analysis on qualitative data because you could never collect enough data. But the internet has changed that. We've got somebody in this webinar who is doing a survey with open-ended questions and so on. If you've collected 1,000 responses to your survey, I think that's a big enough sample. You can produce some reasonably meaningful quantitative data from that. Other people may collect data from Twitter and collect thousands and thousands of Twitter comments and so on and analyze that. That's big enough. But don't draw me into trying to give a number elsewhere. That's not really the topic of this particular presentation. Oh, no, I haven't finished. We haven't done the similarity analysis for documents. Sorry. That's the last tool. I've overrun a little bit, but let's look at the similarity analysis for documents. Here it is on this toolbar here. Let's reset all activations so we know we're starting with a clean slate. Before I go into this tool, let me just give a warning because I see MAXQDA as being like a big toolbox with all sorts of tools in all of these various functions that you can use: coding queries, summary tables, auto coding after searching, and so on. All kinds of tools you can use in different ways on your data. And if we think of those tools like an ordinary toolbox, hammers and screwdrivers and so on, you're well aware that if you use a hammer to put a driver screw into a piece of wood, it's not going to work very well. But you learn generally that hammers are for nails and screwdrivers are for screws and so on, and that's pretty straightforward. Well, the similarity analysis is a bit like introducing a chainsaw into your toolbox. If you can make a mess of your piece of wood with the incorrect use of a hammer, just imagine how much of a mess you can make with the incorrect use of a chainsaw. And that's what this similarity analysis involves. You can very, very easily create a complete nonsense. So you need to do lots of reading before you try and use this tool kind of for real. But we can demonstrate it in quite simple ways. So what do I need? I'm going to activate the interview documents, which we're working to death here. And I'm going to, I think I want to activate, I'll activate the typical workday. We'll have the flexible hours. I'm looking for codes which have been used quite a few times. We'll have the childcare, and we'll have the free time self-care, and we'll have the salary code as well. That'll do me for now. And let's open up the similarity analysis for documents. And I've already got a table here, but let's start a new one so you can see the mechanics of how we create it. So it will work with only for activated documents, and I've got 10 documents in place. So I don't need to think about the documents, but we do need to think about the codes. And I've got an insert activated code. So that's great. I brought in the 6 codes. It counts how many codes I've got here. The 6 codes that I activated beforehand. So that's my data, my activated documents and my activated codes. We can remove any surplus codes if we want to change our minds there. Now down here, we've got a little bit of choice. We've got 2 ways of working this, either existence of the code or the frequency of the code. Those 2 little buttons make a huge difference to the table that is displayed. And for each of them, over here, we've got some further choices as to how do we want to match them. Simple matching. Now, obviously, you're going to go and have to read up what Jacquard's measure of similarity means, or Cookhart's and Radiker. Those who've been paying attention will know that Cookhart's and Radiker are the authors of that book I recommended earlier, Analyzing Qualitative Data with MAXQDA. They are the authors of MAXQDA currently, effectively, so they know what MAXQDA is about. They've written articles about this particular similarity measure, and 2 other people, Russell and Rao. So you've got to choose your matching one. We'll go for simple matching now. And if you go for the code frequency, you've got another set of choices, squared Euclidean or block distance. Goodness only knows what those mean at the moment. Let's go simple. Similarity, simple matching. And we won't bother with any variables. We'll just work on the codes themselves. Click OK. It's coming. Here it is. Here's the new similarity matrix. I can over here rename it if I want. Oh, no, that didn't work. Here we are. I can rename it exercise 1. And when I hover over it, it shows what my chosen codes are. So that's the one we've just done. Now, we've got columns and rows, which are all the documents. See the same names across the top and down the side. So we're looking pairwise as to how each of these documents is similar to each of the others. Down this leading diagonal, we have a series of 1s because each document is obviously identical to itself. It's not just similar, it is identical. So 1 means identity. Look at the whole table and you'll see, let me just take the color shading off. There is no value higher than 1. Everything is between 0 and 1. The interpretation of this table is the closer you are to 1, in other words, the higher the value, the more similar you are. And by clicking on the 3, either coloring by reference to the whole table or to the column or to the row, let's go for the whole table coloring, we get scores. And my eye is drawn here to Tan and Selim, who are both scoring 1 with each other. This is Tan compared with Selim. This is Selim compared with Tan. So they're always identical. You only need 1/2 of the triangle, really. But these are perfectly similar. Tan and Selim are perfectly similar to each other on this table. Very interesting. And where is something really small? Tatiana and Riley are very, very different at 0.17, the white square there. So Tatiana and Riley on this measure look very unsimilar, very dissimilar to each other. But remember Tan and Selim there. Now let's run a new one. And this time we won't change any of the documents or codes. We'll just look at a different way of calculating it. The distance measure for code frequency, and we'll accept the squared Euclidean one. This is the chainsaw at work, remember. Click OK. Here will come a new table. It's doing a fair number of calculations. Now for this table, we're again looking at pairwise comparisons, but now the leading diagonal is 0. In this table, to be similar, you want to be close. To be close, you want the distance to be as small as possible. Values can be anything. Look, I can see a 28.98 up there. That's very large. Now, at least Tan and Selim are coming up as quite close here, but are they necessarily the closest? No, Amadi and David are even closer.
we will probably get some quite different scores. Tatiana and Riley, were they? You know, they were also different. We are the values I've chosen. They're being moderately consistent, but in some situations you can get them very, very different indeed. This tool, this similarity analysis tool, is very, very vulnerable to the particular choice of codes and your choices down here, whether you're going for existence or frequency, similarity or distance, and all of these. With the same data, you could produce 2 different ones depending on this calculation, and 4 different ones depending on this setting, 6 different tables, all with the same data, and they would all give you different answers. So you've really got to do your homework as to what you are trying to identify with your matching or your distance before you use it. It's deceptively easy to populate, but much more complicated to actually understand and interpret. And Tan and Selim, we were looking at there. Let me just give you an illustration of this. If I go into my visual tools and open up Max Maps, and I'm going to do a new 2 case model, and I'm going to drag in Selim and Tan and use the model. Here we are. Here are Selim and Tam, and these are all the codes that are associated with them that have been used with them. The ones down the middle are the ones they have in common: childcare, typical workday, free time. I just move this out of the way, those all were ones that I used, I'd activated and used there. But Selim is coded also to more free time and stricter separation in schedule. Tan hasn't mentioned those. Tan has got better use of free time and volunteering, and some satisfaction ones here that Selim doesn't have. These are the things that are different. These are the things that are the same. Depending on which codes you choose for the similarity analysis, come back to the Mixed Methods tool, the similarity analysis, it's very, very dependent on which codes you happen to choose for looking at the comparisons across all the pairwise possibilities of the documents. That's a little illustration of just, so if you think you've got a similarity, it would probably be a good idea to run a 2 cases model in Max Maps and have a look at what are the differences and so on. The distance measure is using the frequency counts, and I'm not surprised they were fairly close together because we've got 3 and 3, 2 and 3, 2 and 2. They're not so drastically different on those frequencies. But that was the similarity analysis of a document. So let me just go back to my presentation and quickly run down. I've done all of those. So just a few concluding remarks. There's a little conversation going on in the chat about how big a sample should be, but let me just make some concluding remarks. Some further resources. Here is that reference that I was telling you about at the beginning, Analyzing Qualitative Data with MAXQDA by Cookarts and Rediker, Chapter 13, published by Springer. So try and make a note of that. If you're doing a qualitative PhD using MAXQDA, it really might be worth buying that book, I have to say, if your institution doesn't have it in their library. But also, oh, don't like that. Oh, how do I get rid of that? Right. MAXQDA Press. There are links on the website to this. This is a MAXQDA sponsored website, maxqda-press.com. Publishes all sorts of material. It publishes journal articles written by people who've used MAXQDA, but it also has published some textbooks. So there is more technical help on how to use MAXQDA for particular operations. There are some excellent textbooks, freely available, freely downloadable in PDF format, a free resource for you. So go and explore that as well if you're really interested in this mixed methods stuff. The reference manual, context-sensitive help for all of the tools. Hopefully you're aware of that. So, for example, that similarity analysis, when I get to the dialogue, here, context-sensitive help. One click on that and it will jump you into the reference manual at the right place for doing that. There's also another link up here into the page for the similarity analysis. Read more about it, but you need to read a great deal more about it. So use the reference manual and it'll help you through the tools. Use the resources of the research network and lots more videos in the video tutorials. So just a quick reference to the MAXQDA website, lots of things on there, a plug for the research network, a reminder you don't have to be a professor to join the research network. You don't even have to have the word doctor in front of your name. You haven't got to finish your PhD. In my book, once you've got a MAXQDA license, I think you're entitled to join the research network. Please do. You may find it very useful because you may be able to link up with somebody else in your country who speaks your language, can help you through difficulties of the menus where things are getting lost in translation. Or you might find people in other countries speaking different languages, but also interested in the same topic as you. A possibly fantastic resource for you. Here is another link to maxqda-press.com. So just make a note of that. If you do nothing else from this webinar, do follow that up. You'll find that useful. And I think, there is a blog. Go and have a look on the blog. You may find other people have written things about how they successfully use the similarity analysis and so on. And that is it. I have got to the end. I'm going to scan through in a moment, see if I've missed any questions. So if you've asked a question and you're still waiting on for an answer, hang on. But for the rest of you wanting to get on with the rest of your lives, thank you very much for being with me. If you've had half as much fun as I have, you've had a good time. Here is the exit door. At the very top left of your screen, click on the drop down to get the menu and choose the exit, and you'll find your way out. Off you go with MAXQDA's favorite saying, research is a journey, travel it well. That's what I wish for each and every one of you on your research journeys.